Hello everyone, you're welcome to tonight's class. I'm very excited to have every one of you here. A very wonderful shout out to my wife and to all of my friends who are here. Alright, for tonight we'll be continuing from where we stopped yesterday. Yesterday we started on this journey where we were looking at data intelligence, how to train our minds to think with data. The goal of this series actually hopefully is going to be a 3-part series. I intended ending it today, but while still preparing, I discovered that I don't want today's video to be very long, so I may have to just I had to cut it short so that I can have another session tomorrow, God willing. All right, the goal of this session is actually to help us learn how to query data effectively. This is one skill that data analysts need to have, even managers, everyone who deals with data or who deals on data, everyone who interacts with data. This is one skill they need to have, so that if you are presented with a set of data and you are just looking at it, it's just in front of you, you should be able to know how to query it, how to ask it questions, what questions to ask, what process to follow so as to get the best from that set of data. Now, this set of skills, as I said earlier, it's the first part that it's the first things, I would rather say prerequisites that someone should master before they go into data analysis. Yes, before you start learning the formulas, before you start learning the data visualization, before you start learning the codes and the rest of it, it is very important you learn how to feel data, as it were. What questions? How do I come up with questions to ask this data that is in front of me? How do I know which questions are right? How do I know which questions are not right? And the rest of it. So that is exactly what we are going to be looking at today in this particular video, and we'll be looking at 3 sections in today's video. First of all, we are going to be asking ourselves, how do I carry out problem analysis? Okay, problem analysis while querying data, while interacting with data. We'll look into that in details. We'll also look at audience analysis. How do I analyze my audience? Who are the people I'm presenting this data to? How will my audience determine how I present, how I analyze my data? And lastly, we'll just wrap up with the very important, several importance of thinking in terms of data. Just that, the importance of thinking in terms of data. We'll go into details when we get there. So very quickly, we'll start with the first one, audience analysis in data thinking. Very important. We have to learn to analyze our audience. Our audience has a lot to tell us when it comes to data. A lot. If you have your audience, actually determines, as I said in the introduction, how you analyze your data. Now, quickly, the first point that we have there says a skilled data trainer, a skilled data thinker, begins by identifying who will use or interpret the data. Who is this data for? Who am I collecting, or who am I analyzing this for? Who am I presenting it to? Who will the information be relevant to? This is very important because the same data set can have different purposes. It can serve different purposes. To one person, for example, like let's look at the data set we are going to be working with today. Let me project that in a minute. We are going to be working with this data set. This particular one, let's go to the beginning of the table. Yes. Now, this, please don't mind all this analysis I did here. I think I should just get rid of each of them here at the end, so you don't get confused what those are doing there. Yeah, just this. Beautiful. Now, this table is actually a compilation of donors to a particular business. Let's say to a particular business. These are the donors. Let's say they are donors. Okay. This is the date they became members of this particular business and when they began contributing, and these are the donations they have made so far. These are the cities where they belong to. These are the sectors where they work, their email addresses, the gender, first name and last name. We may not need this email address, so you can just get rid of it before you begin your analysis. But for now, this is just the information we have here. Names, gender, please take note, the sector where they work, the donations, the date of their membership when they joined, the donations in dollars, and the city where they reside. Now, why is it important to analyze the person who is going to be looking at this data? Why is it important to analyze your audience? As we have in that first point, let's go back to our slide. As we had in this first point, the first point says that a skilled data thinker begins by identifying who we use or interpret this. And as I said, it is important because that an executive, for example, a manager, may need a quick summary of the total donations by city. He may look at this table and say, oh, I need summary of donations by city. While a data analyst will just want detailed breakdown by sector or maybe by membership. Let's just look at the table once again while I am talking about that. So, as I said earlier, someone who is a skilled data analyst may be looking at a different thing compared to someone who is a manager. So, depending on who you are presenting this table to, your information will be different. Okay, quickly back to our slide. What's the next point? The next point says tailoring insights. The importance of an data audience analysis is going to help you to tailor your insights to match your audience level of data literacy, because that will help them to understand what you're talking about. Now imagine you have to gauge, okay, what is the level of literacy of my audience? How much do they know? What do they not know? For instance, if you are presenting that same data, that table, okay, if you have a non-technical board, people in your audience, maybe board members, they don't have a technical background, it's going to be easier to tell them something like members from the service sector. Let's look at our table very quickly so that you will. Okay, so it's going to be easier to say that members from this sector, the service sector, are actually in Bristol, members of the service sector in a particular city, they donated so amount per year, instead of just showing them complex pivot tables. Okay, not everybody here may know what pivot tables are, but let me just go to the next sheet in this data. This is actually a very small pivot table that I created. Now I can analyze this, or I can redesign this to give me something and say, okay, this is not averages, I want something else. Let me say sum. Let's say instead of this, we can change it. Let's not do that now. But I would have loved to just change it to from sum to from average. This is average, I beg your pardon. We could just change it to sum. Yeah, so that is it, from average. Now it is sum. So that will give us the total by city. If I want to add what is it called now, the sector, I could just drag this and let me make it the columns. All right, so now this is a complex pivot table. Not everybody may understand this table. So instead of presenting this table to a non-technical audience, I would just pick the information and present it in just one single sentence. All right, let's go back to our slide. So that's number 2. It's going to help to understand your audience's level literacy. If you understand that their level of literacy, your presentation will be different. If they are people who are tech savvy, who have probably Excel background, you can show them the entire data pivot table and that will be fine. So that's why it is important to analyze your audience. The third point there in our note here, it says that effective data communication aims to influence decision, not overwhelm. What is this point saying? Once you are in front of your audience, you are asking yourself, what you are asking yourself, what is my goal? Is my goal to just bamboozle them, or is it my goal to inform them? Is my goal to just overwhelm them with stacks of data, stacks of charts? Or is it my goal to just inform them and influence their decisions? That is one question you should ask yourself when you come before your audience. Don't just be carried away. Oh, I have so much information. This data is telling me so much. I have to tell this story as I am feeling passionate about it. You have to slow down and remember that you don't have to overwhelm your audience. You have to influence their decisions by presenting the right data that means something to them. And then lastly, remember that A good communicator balances technical accuracy and accessibility. If you are a good communicator, you should focus on balancing accuracy, technical accuracy, with accessibility. For example, from our table, one information we can get from that table is that female donors contributed majority of funds in 2021. If we analyze that data, it will tell us that. However, it is very important, instead of just saying that, someone who hears that may feel that, oh, female donors we are more motivated in 2021. It is very important that you provide a context, something behind that, and say, okay, this is the reason, this is the reason. Don't just left the reason or the conclusion to the minds of the audience. Make sure that you provide complete information. Now, why is this important? This balances, this kind of balance helps ensure that the message is truthful, and the message is also audience appropriate. If you just go ahead and throw and say, oh, female donors contributed the majority of funds in 2021, you may want to undermine the sacrifices, I would say, of the male donors in the audience among your donors. So it's important you bring about context. You may want to say something like, oh, because in 2021 we had we had more females joining the membership than males. That clarifies it. So don't just throw technical accuracy at people. Make sure you provide balance. Make sure you tell them the whole story. Okay? Now with that, we round up with our point number one, where we talk about audience analysis in data thinking. Very quickly, we want to go to the next set, where we are talking about problem analysis in data thinking. First thing, you analyze your audience. Ask yourself, who am I presenting this and how should I present it to them? And the next question, problem analysis. In problem analysis, you're asking yourself, what problems do I want to solve? The first thing there is that effective data thinking begins with defining the right problem. Take note of that. Right problem. Before collecting or analyzing the data, know the problem. Identify not just problem, but the right one that you are trying to solve. Not just any problem at all, but the right problem that you are trying to solve. Okay? If we look at that table, for example, we could rush into charts and begin to do calculations without clarifying what we are trying to solve. So don't fall for that urge, that rush, that temptation. Sit down. As a good data analyst, ask yourself, what problem am I solving? Now, instead of asking in the table and you say, why are donations dropping, assuming you found out that donations were dropping, instead of asking why are donations dropping, ask yourself rather, which city or sector has shown the steepest decline in donations since 2020? That is more focused, that is more specific, because the reason for donations dropping in a particular year may be different from the reason for donations dropping in another year. Okay, so instead of just casting that generalized blanket over the entire data and say, why are donations dropping? You should be more specific. That question, the right question, will provide the correct answer with which you can then solve the problem. Because if you provide a generalized answer, you are going to have a solution in your hand that is actually not a solution at all. Okay, now the next point says, once a clear problem is set, the next step is to turn vague goals into data-driven questions. So if you have set goals, probably that things you want to achieve with the data, find out which of these goals are vague. Which of these are vague, so that I can clarify them more. I have to make them data-driven questions. So you have to something like this. So in a situation where you are tempted to say, we need to improve donor participation, that's a goal, right? It's better you use the right question and the answer from that right question, and then provide a data focused goal. So instead of saying we need to improve donor participations, you should rather say which membership years have the lowest number of active donors. You see that? So instead of at the beginning you say, okay, this is our goal, we want to improve the number of donors and probably their participation, you should rather ask which membership years have the lowest number of active donors, and what patterns do they share? Are there commonalities? Are there common trends running between these years that will tell us, okay, what happened in this year happened in this year, and that is why we are having lowest number of active donors in these years. With that, you will be able to find out, okay, these are the problems where we have less active donors in these years, and then you profile a solution. Instead of just a generalized question like we need to improve donor participation, use the data, the right question, the answer from the right question to reset your goal and have a better goal cast before you. Next point says complex problems should then be broken into smaller manageable data questions. So once you have your goal, questions definitely will come up. How do we achieve this goal and the rest? You should break them down into smaller manageable questions. For instance, one way you can do this is this particular charity. Let's assume that this table that we have comes from a charity. So the charity's poor performance might not be a single issue. For example, they are trying to say, okay, we want to improve in several areas. Remember that the performance issue, the poor performance, may not actually be because of a single issue. It could be because of a combination of smaller ones, like the problem we talked about in the previous point, fewer donors in a particular year. It could also be because of low donations in a particular city, like Birmingham, for example, and probably a drop in the services sector, members who are from the services sector. So if we are looking at poor performance, narrow poor performance to where those poor performances are coming from. Where are they coming from? Are they coming from a particular year? Are they coming from a particular city? Or are they coming from a particular sector? So what are the 3 points? Is that the last point here? Okay, we have a final one. A data-driven mindset requires using data to validate assumptions before acting. So that's part of the problem analysis. You have to tell yourself, whatever result that comes, I am going to make sure that I use my data-driven mindset instead of assumptions before I act. All right. Now it is easy to assume. For example, I want to make this point very clear. It is very easy to assume if you look at the number of people in London. We may not have time to analyze this data, but from analysis, the number of people in London from this table are actually much more. So people may be wondering, okay, because we have more people in London, that means definitely London will give us the largest sum of donations. That could be true, but there is something that assumption does not look like, does not present rather. There is something it does not show. And what is that? It does not show the fact that cities like Manchester contribute higher averages. Let's look at that table. I think that was the pivot table I was trying to show, or I was showing the last time. Let me just undo this. So from here, look at grand totals. London has the highest, right? But let's go back to the first table I had. You will discover that from here, by average, Manchester has the highest, 5,519 per individual, whereas London comes just next to that, 5,125. Okay, so don't run to assumptions while you are defining your problems. Ensure that you apply data-driven mindset instead of using assumptions. Yes, London has the highest population, but aside the sum, you discover that Manchester, per average, the members give higher than the members in London. Okay, so with that, we are at the end of this particular area where we talk about problem analysis in data thinking, and we talked about the fact that always define the right problem, make sure that you use the answers from the right problem to make your goal more data driven, and then break down complex problems into smaller ones, and then avoid assumptions while you are defining problems. Make sure that you also use your data mindset and not just assumptions. Okay, the last part we're going to be looking at tonight is the importance of data-centered thinking. Now, why is it important to analyze your audience? Why is it important to analyze the problem and make sure that what you are presenting to the audience is the set of data you are presenting to the you are analyzing your audience to give them something that will benefit them, while you are analyzing the problem as well, to make sure that you are not just using something that is not data backed, that is not backed by data. Why is it important to have a data-centered thinking? It keeps you from relying on intuition alone, as that can lead to costly mistakes. Intuitions can be very, very costly. Take, for example, initially at a point, I think at one of the points we talked about London having the highest population. But the funny thing is that as we also looked at, Manchester has the highest population or highest donation per average, while London has the highest total donations. By average, Manchester has the highest. So if we just assume and use our intuition and say, oh, because London donors are the most, we can say intuition says something like, London donors are the most generous because London is a large city. No, the data-based fact would rather say Manchester donors contribute a higher average donation than those in London. Even though London are more in numbers, Manchester are actually doing the heavy lifting. Or the heavier lifting, I think. Yeah. Or should this be the heaviest? Yeah, because there's more than one. The heavier than London. All right, this proves that intuition can mislead. Intuition can be very misleading. Use data. Always use data. Avoid assumptions. Avoid intuition. In fact, use data. Second point says that data-centered thinking improves objectivity by removing personal biases. We're going to look at how to minimize bias in the next video. But suffice it to say that data-centered thinking improves objectivity by removing every form of personal bias. Every form of it. It helps to remove it. What do we actually mean by bias? Probably we'll go into the details of bias later in the next video. But instead of relying on opinions or hearsay, that could cause bias. A team can use donations, the figures from their donations, to decide which cities to focus on and which areas to try to appeal to more donors. All right, so no assumptions, no hearsay, no feeling that okay, this city doesn't like us or something like that. No hearsays. Just use the figures from the data to make your decision. Okay, the next point we see there, why it's important to have data-centered thinking, is that data also helps identify opportunities, patterns, and risks. We mentioned a little about that in the previous video, where we talked about how data can be very beneficial for businesses. It helps them identify new opportunities where they can channel their resources. The same thing we are talking about here. It helps to identify patterns, risks, and the rest. Okay. For example, the table that we are studying currently, we're going to analyze that table when we begin our Excel course, but suffice it to say at this point that analyzing the membership date column, okay, it reveals that donors who joined after 2020 give smaller amounts on average. Okay, if we analyze by year and say, okay, we have this number of years, let's analyze how much was given per average per donor for 2020. Yes, we'll discover that they had smaller amounts per average. All who joined in 2020 gave smaller amounts, or who joined after 2020 gave smaller amounts. And that could suggest a lot of things. Probably newer members, people who joined after 2020, were not really engaged properly, or they were not really onboarded properly. So they don't know how to make their payments, they don't know where to log in, where to do this and where to do that. So they may need more engagement. All right. The last point there says data-centered thinking shifts organizations from opinion-based decisions to evidence-based reasoning. So we'll be rounding up with this. Rather than saying I think, that's someone's opinion, right? People who work with data will say, this data says this. So it's not your opinion. Forget about what you think. So rather than saying I think the service sector is doing well, you can demonstrate it with proof. Something like, you can show that service sector generated over 8,000 in donations if we run that in our pivot table, compared to lower totals from other sectors. And probably in the analysis, you may even want to point out why that could be. Is it that we have more people in the service sectors, or what could that be? You try to find out what is it. Okay, so this is where we are going to be rounding up tonight's video. In the next video, I'll be critically looking at, first of all, bias. How can we avoid bias? The different types of bias is actually going to be a slightly lengthy one, but I'm going to be looking at, first of all, the common type of biases that exist. We are going to also look at how bias enters into the process. How does bias infiltrate our work? And lastly, we also look at how to minimize bias. So it's going to be a lengthy video, and after you have minimized bias, we'll round up that section, the next video, by learning to tell stories. How do you present your data in an exciting way? I appreciate you all. Thank you for being here with us. Thank you.